We've got Randy May, who's president of the Free State Foundation, Richard Bennett, technologist, wireless engineer, and policy expert extraordinaire with ITIF, and a couple of other folks. And of course, we have Larry Downs, who is not only an internet specialist in terms of policy, but is also an author. And I think a lawyer, which is perfect. We got two lawyers, we've got an engineer, and we have a policy expert. That's wonderful.
It's a recovering lawyer.
So we have, I think, a very interesting panel and a very interesting conversation, and I'd like to, I think the first thing I'd like to do is to disagree with the description or the title of the panel, which is setting up innovation and regulation as necessarily friends or enemies. And I was thinking about it last night, and Bartlett, love you to death, but I think it's probably some gray area as opposed to, one versus the other. And I think all of us have, Richard, I know you and I have shared frustrations over the way folks have tried to devolve this debate into extremes on one side versus the other, and the issues are just not that simple. So that being said, let me ask a general question. Hopefully you guys can then respond, and then we're off to the races. And the general question is, why is it that this conversation about innovation and regulation is happening now, and do you think it's the right time to be having that conversation, and if so, why? Randy, since you're closest.
I knew there was a reason I should have said over there. but no, I mean, let's be candid. The primary reason it's happening now is the conjunction of this, marvelous technology and network of networks called the Internet, which keeps changing and evolving and expanding in conjunction with the network neutrality debate, and specifically the FCC's pushing of to adopt a rule. So, that's why I think we're having the conversation, and it's a good one. It's an important one to have because, I would say, Carolyn, despite obviously there surely is a gray area between regulation on the one hand, in some situations can be positive, and in others it can be negative. But in my view, on the particular issue of net neutrality, really there's less gray, and I think that ultimately what the Commission did, and this is the way I'll start our conversation, ultimately what the Commission did will not be good for innovation, and I don't think, in my mind, there's much gray about it. And the reason is, I'll just identify the major failing of the Commission's approach and ultimately its order here. It promulgated a rule which inherently has a lot of ambiguity in it, but that's inherent in a lot of what the FCC does and the way it does it. But in this case, it explicitly said that the net neutrality rule and violations of net neutrality were not going to be tied to findings of market failure or consumer harm. That's in that famous paragraph 78 that I wrote a piece about that Larry picked up on. It explicitly rejected market failure and competitive harm. And as this conversation goes forward, I think we'll see that. And so absent that, it's sort of untethered. This rule, and the FCC has a lot of discretion, and when that's the case, essentially, you tend to inhibit decisions and conduct by businesses that have to risk a lot of capital, and they're less likely to do it in a situation that's so rife with the possibility or in the likelihood, in my view, of regulation.
And I do want to get back to the evidentiary standard in a quick second. Yeah. But Richard, in terms of the formal topic of our discussion, network innovation versus regulation, friends, are right conversation to be having at the right point in time?
I think it slightly misses the point, and I'm kind of reminded of one of the comments that Congressman Boucher made this morning about the value of privacy regulations is to enable consumers to have confidence that when they go on the web, they're not making themselves targets for the exploitation of their personal private information. So a certain level of regulation, I think, is actually stimulative to business to the extent that there are legitimate and sort of widespread fears that that people are exposing themselves to harm. And in the net neutrality situation, it's sort of hard to talk about it without the fact that I'm bored with the subject after 10 years of discussion, kind of coming out. And my sort of my primary desire as far as net neutrality goes is because it's no longer a coherent issue. Net neutrality has become the grab bag for all the grievances that people have against various industries. That you can't really resolve such a broad set of grievances with a single regulation. You have to sort of decompose it into the constituent issues, and then you can address the issues, one at a time. An appropriate level of regulation, I think, is helpful because, for example, the essence of the net neutrality fight is over the anti-discrimination rule. And the FCC seemed to be going in the right direction with that. Congress was headed in the right direction in the Waxman bill with the differentiated transport services being presumptively permissible, but then there being a procedure by which specific practices could be challenged. And then at the very last minute, the FCC reversed the presumption. So it's kind of like turning the opt-out into an opt-in. So rather than premium transport services being presumptively legitimate, they became presumptively illegitimate. The burden of proof shifts to the network operator to prove that that's a good practice, which has, it's not immediately obvious, but the effect of that particular pivot, to use a popular Washington term, at the last minute was to take a class of applications that really require that, like telepresence, and to make broad-scale implementation of telepresence across the internet much more difficult. But see, it's the victims in overregulation are not the things that we already know about. The victims are the forms of innovation that we haven't seen yet, right? And technologies of collaboration on the internet are, we were doing things in DARPA projects and in lab experiments 15 years ago that haven't become fully commercial. And it's because of, there are certain impediments that have to be alleviated by new business plans to enable, these technologies to flourish on the internet. We get a little bit too aggressive about trying to preserve the internet's historical norms, and we sort of lose sight of the fact that innovation means doing things that we haven't done before.
Okay, no, don't steal my next question. Larry, thoughts on the general topic?
Well, it's certainly understandable why we hear more and more about the question of regulation and innovation. One of the exercises I used to do with my law students was to look at how it is, the sort of relationship between economic activity and kind of the gravitational pull that has for regulators. And to look at, for example, the United Nations treaties on the law of the moon and the law of outer space. They're very short. They don't have much to say because there's not much going on. And then, sort of move into slightly more active areas like the law of the sea. And, there you have, a very elaborate set of proceedings. The United Nations has been working on this treaty for many, many years. The United States never signed it. It's got more and more elaborate, and more, because the more things that were happening, the more opportunities there were to regulate them. And I think in similar fashion, kind of following on a metaphor of a frontier, then digital life or everything that goes with the internet, well, in 1995, when Congressman Boucher started the Congressional Internet Caucus, there wasn't very much economic activity. There wasn't much to talk about, and there wasn't really much draw. Well, now, of course, it's become the driver of economic growth in many respects. And as a result, it's drawing the attention of regulators, not just federal, state, but international as well. The problem is the lens that I use to look at these intersections of innovation and regulation is something I coined many, many years ago, which I call the law of disruption. It was also the title of my most recent book. And the law of disruption said, and I stole this from lots of other people, kind of boiled it down myself, but it said that political, economic, and social systems change incrementally, technology changes exponentially. And the difference in speed between, let's say, political change, between regulatory change and technological change, and certainly that's the case with digital technology, means that effectively it's ungovernable using traditional mechanisms. And we have so many examples of this. In the last 10 years, I just made a list of the ones I remember. We've had, again, this is global, international, federal, and state. We've had efforts to regulate spam, spyware, identity theft, pornography, gambling, piracy, privacy, intellectual property, cyberstalking, e-personalization, and now most recently net neutrality. At best, the regulations, the laws, whatever comes out of those efforts is obsolete by the time it's actually formalized, because the technology has moved much more quickly than the regulators. At worst, and I think the thing that worries me the most, is the law of unintended consequences. Many of these statutes have proven ineffective for the use that they were intended for, but that they have kind of had second lives, they've been revived and repurposed for things that had absolutely no, not what they were intended for, and in things that can be extremely harmful to the development of a robust internet economy. And so when we talk about regulation and innovation, I think the thing I worry about most is the law of unintended consequences. And I don't think it's just a theoretical concern. Lots and lots of unfortunate examples where that's come up.
Now, this question may be overlapping with Mr. Mandel's panel later on, but I was hoping to tee off, Richard, a comment you made, and I think it's relevant to comments that the other two have made, which is, let's do a little bit of what exactly do you think fits into that bucket deemed innovation? And then, because there's a lot of conversation around Washington about X, Y, and Z will spur innovation, X, Y, and Z will kill innovation. I'd like to do a Control-Alt-Delete and just get your thoughts as to what is it you think is innovation? And then separately, what do you see as catalysts for innovation, however you would define it? Randy.
Well, I'll answer the second part first, because to me that's easier. You know what? Profit is a catalyst to innovation. I could put it that bodaciously. Now, obviously, that has to be combined with creativity and ingenuity and freedom. These are all pretty simple sounding words, but maybe I've missed something in my years, but I think profit spurs a lot of innovation because people want to realize a return on on their investment and to make money. So that is to me a spur. Now, here's the problem with this rule and what the FCC has done. Now, if you listen to Richard when he started, it sounded like number one, he was bored with the topic, and we might all agree with that. But he said, sort of initially that he's not quite, and I'm paraphrasing, not quite as bothered by this rule, probably it sounded like, as Randy May might be. But as he went along and talked about it, if you listened, he sounded more and more concerned about what the effects might be of the rule and how the FCC had shifted from one presumption to another and what might happen. Now, here's picking up on what he would say and to try and find some, and there's some common ground here probably. I'll concede that a lot, the FCC has issued a rule. I pointed out some, I could point out a lot, from my view, a lot of the problems, but a lot will depend in terms of innovation and investment, how the FCC implements the rule from this point forward, because it can be more or less harmful to innovation and investment, because now we're into the implementation phase. A lot's going to happen. Now, let me give you one example here, because this goes back to what I said about profit and why that's important. A lot of you probably heard during this debate Chairman Janikowski as general counsel and others